Hey there! Welcome to Tales Narration.
Jessica's laughter echoed through the cafeteria, sharp and mocking. She leaned against the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone as she aimed it at Ethan. "Oh my God, look at his shoes," she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Did you dig those out of a dumpster?" Ethan kept his head down, his cheeks burning as he shoved his tray aside. He could feel the stares of everyone around him, their whispers cutting deeper than Jessica's words ever could. Just ignore her, he told himself, but the humiliation clung to him like a second skin. Years later, Ethan stood in the center of a lavish penthouse, his tailored suit fitting perfectly, his confidence unshakable. He had built an empire from nothing, and now he was here, shaking hands with one of the most powerful men in the city, Richard Harrington. "Ethan, I've heard amazing things about your company," Richard said, his voice warm and genuine. "I'm looking forward to working with you." "The feeling's mutual," Ethan replied, his tone smooth. But his eyes caught movement behind Richard and his stomach tightened. A woman stepped into view, her blonde hair catching the light, her icy blue eyes locking onto his. "Jessica!" Her lips parted slightly, her expression flickering between shock and something else, something dangerous. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside him. "It's been a long time." The tension in the room was palpable, but Richard seemed oblivious. "Ah, you two know each other. Jessica, this is the man I've been telling you about, the one who's going to help us take Harrington Enterprises to the next level." Jessica forced a smile, but her eyes never left Ethan's. "Yes, we go way back." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations, but it was the evenings that Ethan looked forward to the most, the dinners with Richard, the late-night conversations that turned into something more. Richard was kind, intelligent, and charming in a way that Ethan had never expected. One night, as they shared a bottle of wine on the balcony overlooking the city, Richard reached for Ethan's hand. "I don't know how to say this," he began, his voice soft, "but I've grown very fond of you." Ethan's heart raced. "I feel the same way." Their relationship moved quickly after that, and soon, Ethan found himself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie on the morning of their wedding. The door creaked open, and Jessica stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "Congratulations," she said, her voice flat. "I never thought I'd see the day my father married someone like you." Ethan turned to face her, his jaw tight. "What do you want, Jessica?" She took a step closer, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. "I want you to call it off. You don't belong in this family." Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Your father loves me, and I love him. That's all that matters." Jessica's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Ethan thought she might lash out. Instead, she smirked. "We'll see about that." The ceremony was perfect, until Jessica stood to give her speech. She raised her glass, her smile saccharine sweet. "To my father and his new husband," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I never thought I'd see the day when someone like Ethan." The room fell silent as a server tripped, spilling red wine all over Jessica's pristine white dress. She gasped, her face turning crimson as everyone stared. Ethan stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Richard's arm. "Let's get out of here," he whispered. Richard nodded, but before they could leave, Jessica grabbed Ethan's arm. "This isn't over," she hissed. Later that night, as Ethan and Richard lay tangled in each other's arms, their breath still uneven from their lovemaking, Ethan traced his fingers along Richard's chest, his heart swelling with contentment. But as he closed his eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica would stop at nothing to tear them apart. "What are you thinking about?" Richard murmured sleepily. Ethan hesitated. "Jessica." Richard sighed. "She'll come around, she just needs time." But Ethan wasn't so sure, and as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help but wonder what she would do next. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the bedroom. Ethan stirred, his arm brushing against Richard's chest as he shifted. He blinked sleepily, the events of the previous day still lingering in his mind. Jessica's venomous glare during the wedding reception, her whispered threats, it all felt like a storm waiting to break. As he sat up, something caught his eye. The vintage jewelry box on the dresser was slightly ajar. His heart skipped a beat. That box wasn't just any trinket. It held Richard's late wife's engagement ring, a family heirloom that Richard had gifted to Ethan as a symbol of their commitment. "Richard," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. "Wake up." Richard groaned softly, rubbing his eyes. "What's wrong?" "The jewelry box," Ethan said, pointing. "It's open." Richard's eyes snapped to the dresser, and he was out of bed in an instant. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and flipped the lid open. The ring was gone. "Jessica," he muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Jessica was bitter, but this was a new level of spite. "Are you sure it's her?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Who else would it be?" Richard said, his voice flat. He ran a hand through his graying hair, frustration etched into every line of his face. "She's been trying to make a point ever since we got engaged. This is her way of lashing out." Ethan stood, pulling on a robe. "We need to confront her." Richard hesitated, his gaze softening as he looked at Ethan. "I don't want this to escalate. She's still my daughter." "And I'm your husband," Ethan shot back, his voice firm but not unkind. "She can't keep doing this. It's not just about the ring, it's about respect." Richard sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, but let's handle this carefully." They found Jessica in the sunroom, sipping coffee with her legs tucked beneath her on the plush sofa. She looked up as they entered, her icy blue eyes narrowing. "Morning," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Jessica," Richard began, his voice calm but firm, "we noticed something's missing." She raised an eyebrow innocently. "Oh, what would that be?" Ethan stepped forward, holding up the empty jewelry box. "The ring, your mother's ring." Jessica's expression didn't falter. She took another sip of her coffee, her gaze never leaving Ethan's. "And you think I took it?" "Did you?" Richard asked, his tone sharper now. Jessica set her cup down with a clink and leaned back, a smirk playing on her lips. "Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. What are you going to do about it, Daddy? Call the police on your own daughter." Richard's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, clearly struggling to rein in his temper. Ethan, however, wasn't as patient. "This isn't a game, Jessica. That ring means something to Richard, to both of us." Jessica laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the tension in the room. "Oh, please, don't act like you care about my mother's memory. You just want to parade around with that ring on your finger, flaunting how much you've taken from me." Ethan took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "I haven't taken anything from you, Jessica. If anyone's trying to take something, it's you." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You took my father. You swooped in here with your sob story about overcoming adversity and made him fall for your little act. But I see right through you, Ethan. You're just using him to get back at me for high school." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his composure. "That's not true, and you know it." "Do I?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, this whole thing feels like one big revenge plot." Richard stepped between them, his hands raised. "Enough, both of you." He turned to Jessica, his expression pained. "If you have the ring, give it back, please." Jessica crossed her arms, her chin lifting defiantly. "What if I do?" For a moment, no one spoke. The air between them crackled with tension, each waiting for the other to make the next move. Finally, Richard sighed heavily. "Jessica, if you don't return it, there will be consequences." Her smirk faltered for a split second before she regained her composure. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," Richard said firmly. Jessica stared at him, her icy blue eyes searching his face for any sign of weakness. When she found none, her shoulders slumped slightly, and she turned away. "Fine," she muttered under her breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring, tossing it onto the coffee table with a clatter. Ethan picked it up carefully, relief flooding through him as he slipped it back into the box. But before he could say anything, Jessica was already walking toward the door. "This isn't over," she said, turning to glare at both of them. "You think you've won? Think again." As she slammed the door behind her, Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Richard. This wasn't just about a ring anymore. Jessica's resentment was simmering dangerously close to boiling over, and neither of them knew what she would do next. Richard placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his touch reassuring despite the tension in the air. "We'll deal with this, together." Ethan nodded, but as he looked down at the jewelry box in his hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Jessica wasn't going to back down, and neither was he. "What if she tries something else?" Ethan asked quietly. Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled Ethan into a gentle embrace, his voice soft but resolute when he finally spoke. "Then we'll face it together." Ethan paced the living room, his mind racing. Jessica's defiance weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her behavior than just childish spite. Richard had left for a business meeting, leaving Ethan alone in the house, a rare opportunity to dig deeper. He didn't need to search for long. As he wandered into the guest room where Jessica had been staying, something caught his eye. The closet door was slightly ajar, and inside, a small box peeked out from beneath a pile of clothes. Ethan hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Jessica to appear out of nowhere. But the house was silent. He pulled the box out and opened it, his breath catching. Inside were several items he recognized: Richard's late wife's silver bracelet, a pair of gold earrings, and even a vintage watch that Richard had mentioned missing months ago. But there was more. Photos of Richard with his arm around Ethan, torn at the edges, and a stack of letters addressed to Jessica from her mother, marked with angry scribbles and scratches. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered under his breath. A creak from the hallway made him freeze. He turned just as Jessica stepped into the doorway, her icy blue eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Her arms crossed over her chest, her stance defensive but her expression unreadable. "Going through my things now, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Ethan held up the box. "This doesn't belong to you, Jessica. Why are you stealing from your own father?" She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You think this is about stealing? God, you're clueless." He stepped closer, keeping his voice steady. "Then enlighten me, because I don't get it. Why sabotage your father's happiness? Why target me? What did I ever do to you?" Jessica's lips tightened, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the storm beneath. "You think this is about you? Please, this is about him." She gestured vaguely toward the rest of the house. "Your father," Ethan frowned. "What does he have to do with this?" Her laugh turned bitter. "Everything. My whole life he's been obsessed with his company, his legacy. He barely noticed I existed unless I was causing trouble. And then you come along, some self-made hotshot, and suddenly he's all smiles and let's have dinner together and you'll love Ethan. I mean, seriously, you think I'm just going to sit back and let you replace me in his life too?" Ethan stared at her, trying to process her words. "Jessica, I'm not trying to replace you. I love your father and he loves both of us. But this stealing, lying, threatening, it's not going to fix anything." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You don't get it, do you? I don't want to fix anything. I want it broken. I want him to feel what I've felt, alone, unimportant, forgot." The raw pain in her voice caught Ethan off guard. For the first time, he saw past the icy exterior to the hurt that fueled her actions. But before he could respond, she snatched the box from his hands and stepped back, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so clever, figuring out my little stash," she hissed. "But this isn't over, not even close." And with that, she turned on her heel and strode out of the room, leaving Ethan standing there, his mind spinning. He knew one thing for certain: Jessica wasn't just going to let this go. Later that evening, as Ethan sat with Richard in the study, he debated whether to tell him about the stolen items and the confrontation with Jessica. Richard sipped his whiskey, his expression thoughtful as he glanced at Ethan. "Something on your mind?" Richard asked, his voice warm and inviting. Ethan hesitated, then decided to tread carefully. "I ran into Jessica earlier. She seemed upset." Richard sighed, setting his glass down. "She's always been volatile, but she'll come around eventually." "I'm not so sure about that," Ethan admitted. "She's holding on to a lot of anger, Richard. I think she feels overlooked." Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "I know I haven't been the best father to her. After her mother passed, I threw myself into work. I thought I was protecting her by giving her everything she wanted, but maybe I just made things worse." Ethan reached across the table, placing his hand over Richard's. It's not too late to fix things, but we need to confront this head-on, before it spirals out of control. Richard looked at him, his eyes searching Ethan's face. You really care about her, don't you? I care about us, Ethan said firmly. Just then, a noise from the hallway made them both turn. Jessica stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, and her expression unreadable. Careful, Dad, she said softly. He says all the right things, but you don't know what he's really after. Jessica, Richard started, but she cut him off. No, Dad, I'm done playing nice. She stepped into the room, her gaze locking onto Ethan S. If you think I'm just going to sit back and watch you take everything from me, you're dead wrong. Ethan stood slowly, his heart pounding as he faced her. Jessica, you need to stop this. Whatever grudge you're holding, it's not worth destroying your family over. My family, she spat. You don't get to talk about my family. Richard rose from his chair, his voice firm but calm. Jessica, that's enough. The tension in the room was palpable as Jessica glared at them both. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out, leaving Richard and Ethan staring after her in stunned silence. We need to do something, Ethan said finally. Richard nodded grimly, but what? Before Ethan could reply,